What if everything you thought you knew about starting over was wrong? What if the real journey was about letting go of the past and embracing the unknown? In today's story, one woman discovers that true peace doesn't come from fixing what's broken, but from learning to live with the changes. Stick around to see how she transforms her life, one step at a time. Before we dive in, let us know, what time are you listening to this and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Bernice Caldwell had never expected that one day she would find herself standing in front of the mirror, brushing her hair with a quiet, distant expression. It wasn't just that she had aged. It was that life had shifted beneath her feet without warning. She wasn't sure who she was anymore, standing there alone in a house that had once been full of laughter and warmth. It had been 6 months since Walter, her husband of 35 years, passed away from a sudden heart attack. She still wasn't used to the silence, to the empty side of the bed, the quiet that had taken over the house. Even now, she found herself expecting to hear his voice in the next room, asking her where she'd left the remote or teasing her about her morning coffee ritual. But instead, there was only an overwhelming stillness. Bernice stood at the kitchen counter, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. She glanced at the phone in front of her, the text from Tanya, her daughter in Seattle, flashing on the screen. It had been a few weeks since they'd last spoken. Their relationship, once so close, had become strained since Walter's passing. Tanya had been insistent that her mother come visit, but Bernice had hesitated. She wasn't sure what she was supposed to be anymore. "You should come, Mom. I miss you. It's time to start a new chapter. It'll be good for you." Bernice had read the message more than once, the words sinking in like a stone in a still pond. She could feel the weight of them in her chest. Tanya wanted her to leave the place where Walter had once been. But could she really do that? Could she leave this home, the one place where memories of him still lingered, to start something new? The phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a reminder about her flight. Bernice stared at the screen, her finger hovering over the button to confirm her ticket. She didn't know if she was ready. She hadn't traveled alone in years. She'd always relied on Walter to take care of the details, to make sure everything was planned and executed perfectly. The very thought of traveling alone made her stomach churn. What if something went wrong? What if she couldn't handle it? She thought of Tanya's voice again, urging her to come. She knew her daughter meant well, but the weight of the decision was heavy. Bernice felt small, unsure. But then, almost as if the decision had been made for her, her finger pressed the screen, confirming the flight. "I'm doing this," she whispered to herself, even though she wasn't sure she believed it. Later that evening, Bernice packed a small suitcase. She didn't own much anymore. A few pieces of clothing, some books, and a few keepsakes from their travels. She folded her clothes carefully, trying to ignore the tears threatening to spill. The house felt colder now, emptier than it ever had before. She walked slowly from room to room, touching the things Walter had left behind, the things that reminded her of him. She paused in the living room, where his chair sat next to the window, the light falling across the seat just as it had when he'd still been alive. "I miss you," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. She sat in his chair for a moment, closing her eyes and allowing herself to feel the weight of the grief that she had been carrying since his death. It was a grief that she couldn't escape, no matter how hard she tried. But tomorrow she would leave. She would go to Seattle to her daughter and try to start a new chapter. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, there was something more waiting for her. Bernice awoke the next morning to the sound of birds outside her window, the sunlight spilling across her bed. It was a new day, the first of many without Walter by her side. She pushed herself out of bed, the weight of the previous day's decision still heavy on her shoulders. But she knew she couldn't stay frozen in time. She packed her last few items, carefully placing the old photo album of her and Walter on top of her suitcase, the one he had insisted on taking everywhere, the one that had captured every milestone in their life together. She had always called it their forever book, a collection of memories that had been so deeply intertwined with her own sense of self. Before she left, she paused at the front door, looking back at the empty house one last time. It would never be the same. But then, maybe that was the point. With a deep breath, Bernice stepped out into the world, ready to take the first steps into the unknown. As Bernice arrived at the airport, she felt an unfamiliar nervousness. The bustling crowd, the hurried people moving in all directions, it all felt so foreign. She fumbled with her ticket, unsure of where to go or what to do next. She hadn't traveled alone in decades, and the thought of it made her heart race. But then she saw the sign for her flight. Seattle. Her flight. Bernice swallowed her nerves and made her way to the gate. She handed her ticket to the attendant, who looked her over with an air of impatience. She could feel the scrutiny in the air, a reminder that she didn't quite fit in with the rest of the travelers. But she ignored it, walking past the attendant and into the waiting area. It wasn't until she sat down, clutching her purse tightly, that she realized how much she was holding on to. She was still holding on to the past, to the memory of Walter, to the comfort of familiarity. But in that moment, something shifted. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. She had made a choice. She was here, and for the first time in a long time, she felt the faintest glimmer of hope. This would be her journey, her first steps into the unknown. The flight to Seattle wasn't long, but it felt like an eternity to Bernice. Sitting in the cramped airplane seat, she tried to distract herself by looking out of the window, watching the landscape below transform as the plane ascended into the sky. The world looked different from up here, smaller, less intimidating. As the plane leveled off, Bernice settled back in her seat, trying to focus on her breath. She had done it. She had made it this far. The thought was enough to bring a small smile to her lips. But then, like clockwork, the doubt crept back in. She could feel it lingering in her chest like a weight. What would Seattle be like? Would Tanya even have time for her? Would it feel like she was imposing on her daughter's life? Or worse, would Tanya think she was a burden? Bernice looked around at the other passengers, most of them chatting away or absorbed in their own activities. She felt an odd sense of isolation, despite being surrounded by so many people. It reminded her of how she had often felt after Walter passed, like she was still trying to find her place in a world that had moved on without her. The flight attendants passed through the aisles offering drinks and snacks, but Bernice wasn't hungry. She politely declined and turned her attention back to the window. Below her, a patchwork of green fields and winding rivers stretched out as far as she could see. There was a peacefulness in the landscape that made her feel a little calmer. The flight seemed to drag on, and eventually the announcement came. "We will be landing in Seattle shortly. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened and your tray tables are up." Bernice braced herself for the descent, gripping the armrests. The nerves were coming back now. This was it. She was stepping into something new, but it felt like stepping into the unknown. She wasn't sure if she was ready. When the plane finally touched down in Seattle, Bernice felt an overwhelming wave of relief wash over her. She had made it. The city, with its towering buildings and sprawling streets, looked nothing like the small, quiet town she had left behind. The hustle and bustle of the airport felt a world away from the peacefulness of her home. Tanya was waiting for her near the baggage claim, holding a sign with her name on it. As soon as their eyes met, Tanya waved, her smile warm but tinged with a hint of nervousness. "Mom," Tanya said, wrapping her arms around her in a tight hug. "I'm so glad you're here." Bernice smiled, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Tanya seemed distant, as if there was something she wasn't saying. Bernice brushed it off, not wanting to make it awkward. After all, she was the one who had decided to come here, to step into Tanya's world. They collected Bernice's luggage, and Tanya led her out of the airport and toward the parking lot. As they drove, Tanya filled the silence with stories about her work, the things she had been up to, but Bernice couldn't help but feel like a stranger in her daughter's life. Tanya was busy, clearly caught up in her own world. It wasn't that Tanya didn't care, but Bernice couldn't shake the feeling that she was intruding. The drive was long, and as they made their way through the city, Bernice couldn't help but notice the contrast between Seattle and the small town she had left behind. The streets were crowded with cars, the buildings were tall and imposing, and everything seemed so fast-paced. Tanya pulled into a small apartment complex and parked. Bernice followed her inside, feeling a wave of unfamiliarity. The apartment was cozy but modern, much different from the homey feel of her own house. It was clear that Tanya had made a life for herself here, and Bernice was just a visitor, trying to find her place. After a quick tour, Tanya excused herself to take a call. Bernice was left alone in the living room, staring out the window at the city below. The lights twinkled in the distance, but it didn't bring the comfort she had hoped for. Bernice felt like an outsider. She had always been the one to take care of things, to make sure everything was in place, but now with Walter gone, she felt lost. Even her own daughter, it seemed, had her own life, one that Bernice was no longer a part of. She walked over to the couch and sat down, her mind spinning with thoughts of the past. She had come here to start fresh, to move on, but it was harder than she had imagined. Would she ever find her place again? The silence in the apartment was deafening. Bernice closed her eyes, letting the weight of everything settle over her. She had made it this far, but what came next? When Tanya returned to the living room, she seemed more relaxed, though Bernice could see that her daughter's mind was elsewhere. Tanya sat down beside her, offering a smile. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said, her voice soft. "I know I've been distracted. There's just so much going on." Bernice nodded, understanding, but she couldn't ignore the feeling that Tanya wasn't fully present. She had come here looking for connection, but she wasn't sure if she was finding it. "It's okay," Bernice said, though a small part of her wished things were different. She hadn't come all this way to feel more alone than she already did. As night fell and the city lights twinkled outside, Bernice sat in silence, her thoughts a million miles away. The uncertainty of what lay ahead weighed on her, but one thing was clear. She was far from home, in a place she didn't quite understand, and it was up to her to figure out what came next. And somewhere, deep inside her, she knew she was ready to find out. The next morning, Bernice woke up to the sound of rain against the windows. It was still early, and the city outside her daughter's apartment looked foggy and distant, as if the clouds were hiding the world from view. She had always liked the rain, but today it felt like a reminder of how far she had come. Physically, but not emotionally. Tanya had already left for work, leaving Bernice alone in the apartment. She stood by the window for a moment, staring out at the misty streets below, feeling both a sense of relief and a rising sense of unease. This was supposed to be a fresh start. This was supposed to be the next chapter of her life, but so far it felt more like a continuation of the same, like she was still stuck in the past. The apartment felt cold, and it wasn't just because of the Seattle rain. It was the silence. It was the absence of the life she used to know. Walter's presence, which had once filled every corner of their home, was gone. She still had trouble wrapping her mind around it. Bernice found herself absent-mindedly sorting through her suitcase, unpacking her clothes, folding them neatly, just as she had done for years. She didn't know why she felt the need to do it. Maybe it was the only routine that still felt familiar. She missed the rhythm of her old life, the predictability of it all. As she finished unpacking, she noticed the small stack of books she had brought with her. She hadn't read much since Walter's death, her interest in anything other than the empty spaces in her house fading with each passing day. But something about the idea of reading felt comforting now. Something to pass the time, something to distract her from the emptiness. Bernice sat on the couch, opened one of the books, and began to read, her eyes skimming the pages. But after a few minutes, her thoughts drifted again. She wasn't really reading. She was thinking about the conversation she had with Tanya last night. Tanya had been distant. She didn't seem like herself. Bernice couldn't help but wonder if it was her presence here that made Tanya act this way. Was she a burden? Was her daughter resenting her for coming? Maybe she had been right to stay behind. Maybe this trip was a mistake. She closed the book with a soft sigh and stood up. She needed to get out of the apartment. She needed to do something, anything, to stop these thoughts from spinning out of control. Bernice walked down the busy streets of Seattle, the cool rain kissing her face. She pulled her jacket tighter around her body, unsure of where she was headed, just knowing that she needed to be out in the world, not stuck in the quiet, empty apartment. The city felt like another world. People were bustling past her, each person caught in their own lives, moving with purpose and direction. And there she was, wandering through it all, invisible. It was the same feeling she had had at the airport, the same sensation that had plagued her since Walter's death. She wasn't sure where she fit in anymore. As she walked, she found herself near a small park. The sound of children laughing and playing echoed in the distance, and Bernice paused for a moment. She hadn't realized how much she missed the simple joy of being around people. Even though she felt like an outsider, there was something about seeing others, living their lives, that brought her a strange sense of comfort. She sat on a bench under a large tree, its leaves rustling softly in the breeze. For a moment, she closed her eyes and just listened to the world around her. The sounds of the city, the laughter, the distant hum of traffic. It all felt like life was continuing, even though she was standing still. She felt a tap on her shoulder, pulling her from her thoughts. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" Bernice turned around to see a woman standing there, holding a coffee cup, her eyes bright and friendly. She smiled, waiting for Bernice's response. "No, it's not taken," Bernice said, surprised by the woman's warmth. The woman smiled and sat down beside her, sipping her coffee. "I'm Mia," she said, extending her hand. "I come here to think sometimes. It's quiet, you know." Bernice hesitated for a moment before shaking her hand. "Bernice," she said quietly, "I don't come here often." Mia nodded, looking out at the park. "I don't either, but I needed a change of scenery. You look like you're thinking a lot. Anything on your mind?" Bernice considered her for a moment. It wasn't often that people asked her about her thoughts. She was used to keeping things to herself, to hiding her feelings behind a polite smile. But something about Mia made her want to talk. "I'm just adjusting to a new place," Bernice began, her voice quieter than she had intended. "My daughter lives here. I'm visiting her, but it feels strange, like I don't belong." Mia turned to face her, nodding as if she understood. "It's tough, isn't it? Finding where you fit in, especially when you're starting over in a place that feels so unfamiliar." Bernice looked at Mia, feeling a wave of gratitude for her kindness. She hadn't expected to meet someone who understood so quickly. "I don't know what I'm doing here," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. Mia smiled gently. "I think you're doing just fine," she said. "Sometimes just showing up is the hardest part." Bernice let out a soft laugh, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. It wasn't much, but it was something. For the first time since she had arrived in Seattle, she felt like maybe she wasn't as invisible as she thought. As she walked back to the apartment later, the rain had stopped, and the sky had cleared. The air felt fresh, and the world seemed a little less heavy. Bernice realized that maybe she didn't have to have it all figured out. Maybe she could just take it one step at a time. Tanya was home when Bernice returned. The tension between them was still there, but something had shifted in Bernice. She wasn't just a visitor in Tanya's life anymore. She was here for herself, too. And maybe, just maybe, this trip would help her find the peace she had been searching for. She walked into the living room, where Tanya was sitting on the couch, looking at her phone. "Hey," Bernice said softly. Tanya looked up, offering a small smile. "Hey, Mom, how was your walk?" "Good," Bernice replied, feeling a quiet sense of hope inside her. "Good." The days began to blur together for Bernice. Seattle had a rhythm that she wasn't sure she fit into. Her daughter's apartment, while cozy, felt foreign, like a place she wasn't supposed to be. Each morning, Tanya left early for work, and each evening, she returned just long enough to grab a quick bite or a phone call, before retreating to her own world. The silence between them hung in the air, unspoken but ever present. Bernice spent most of her days in a quiet solitude. She visited local parks, walked through the city, and sometimes sat in cafes, watching the world go by. It felt like an endless cycle, her outside world moving while she remained stagnant, unsure of her place in it all. One afternoon, as she sat by the window in a small cafe, the rain falling softly outside, Bernice stared into her cup of coffee. She hadn't been able to concentrate on anything for days. Books, the people she passed, even her own thoughts. It was as though there was a fog in her mind, a fog she couldn't escape. "Excuse me, mind if I sit here?" A voice interrupted her reverie. Bernice looked up to see a man standing beside her table, holding a cup of coffee in his hand. He looked familiar, though she couldn't place him right away. She gave him a polite smile. "No, go ahead." The man sat down across from her, and for a moment they both just looked at each other. He had kind eyes, a warm smile, and a quiet air about him. He seemed to notice the uncertainty in Bernice's gaze, and after a beat he spoke. "I don't mean to intrude, but you look like you're a bit lost," he said gently. Bernice blinked, taken aback. It wasn't something anyone had said to her in a long time. She hadn't even realized how lost she had felt until those words hit her. She let out a soft laugh, though it was tinged with sadness. "I guess I am," she admitted. "I'm just trying to figure things out. But it's harder than I thought." The man nodded as if he understood. "I know the feeling. Sometimes it feels like the world's moving and you're just stuck, trying to catch up." Bernice stared into her coffee cup, swirling it absent-mindedly. "I'm here visiting my daughter. It's been difficult. I thought it would be easier, but I just feel like I don't belong." There was a brief silence. Then the man leaned forward, his voice soft but kind. "It's tough when we get to a point where we have to start over. It's like we lose the script we've been following all these years." Bernice nodded, looking up at him. He had a warmth to him, a kindness in his eyes that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone in this feeling. "I'm not sure how to keep going," she confessed. "I came here thinking I would find some peace, but it's harder than I thought. I miss my life, the way it was, even though I know it's gone. I miss my husband, Walter. I don't know how to be without him." There was a pause, and for a moment it felt as though the entire world had stopped, leaving only the quiet hum of the cafe around them. The man seemed to understand the weight of her words. "You've lost a lot," he said softly, "but maybe there's something else waiting for you here, not to replace what you lost, but to help you rediscover who you are. It doesn't happen overnight, though. It takes time." Bernice felt something shift inside her, a small spark of hope. It was faint, but it was there. "I don't know if I can rediscover anything," she whispered almost to herself. "I'm not even sure who I am anymore." The man smiled kindly, as though he had heard this many times before. "You are more than the things you've lost, and you are more than the person you think you've become. You just have to give yourself the chance to see it." Bernice looked at him, not sure what to say. He wasn't offering her answers. He was offering something more: understanding. That evening, when Tanya came home, she noticed the shift in her mother. Bernice wasn't as distant, not as withdrawn. Tanya had been worried about her mother, about how she was adjusting, but she hadn't known how to help. The distance between them felt too wide, and she hadn't known how to bridge it. "Mom, you're looking better," Tanya remarked as she set down her bag. Bernice gave her a small, genuine smile. "I think I'm starting to figure some things out." Tanya paused, glancing at her mother, trying to read her face. There was something different in Bernice's expression, something lighter, as if a burden had been lifted, even if just a little. "That's good," Tanya said slowly. "I'm glad." There was an awkward pause before Bernice spoke again, her voice a little softer than usual. "Tanya, I don't want to be a burden. I know I came here to get away from everything, but I also know I can't just expect everything to be fixed overnight." Tanya's expression softened. "Mom, you're not a burden, but I do want you to know I'm here. I want to help." For a moment, Bernice just stood there, her heart a little lighter than before. She hadn't realized how much she had been yearning for that reassurance. "Thank you," she whispered, the words coming out much easier than she expected. Later that night, as she lay in bed, Bernice thought about the conversation she had with the man in the cafe. Maybe he was right. Maybe she didn't need to have all the answers. Maybe it was enough just to take things one step at a time. And as the rain began to fall again outside, Bernice closed her eyes, letting the sound of it soothe her. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was ready to face it. The next few days passed in a quiet rhythm, one that Bernice wasn't sure she was comfortable with, but also couldn't bring herself to change. Tanya was busy with work, as usual, and Bernice found herself wandering the streets of Seattle, sometimes stopping to window shop or sit in a cafe, trying to find something to hold on to in this city that felt so unfamiliar. It wasn't that the city itself was intimidating. It was vibrant, full of life, and teeming with people. It was the feeling of being alone in the crowd that unsettled her. There were no familiar faces, no one who knew her the way Walter had. The world outside seemed to be moving, changing, evolving, and Bernice was left behind, standing still, unsure of where to go. One afternoon, while walking through a park near the water, Bernice saw an elderly woman sitting on a bench, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She was alone, much like Bernice, but there was something about her demeanor that caught Bernice's attention. It was as if the woman had found peace, a quiet contentment, something Bernice was still searching for. Curious, Bernice walked over to the bench and sat down, keeping a polite distance from the woman. They sat in silence for a few minutes, just watching the water ripple in the distance, the sound of children laughing and playing nearby. Bernice felt the pull of her own thoughts but resisted the urge to retreat into them. Instead, she decided to speak. "It's beautiful here, isn't it?" Bernice said, breaking the silence. The woman smiled, her face wrinkling with warmth. "Yes, it is. I come here when I need to clear my head." She turned her gaze to Bernice, her eyes kind but sharp. "You look like you could use a bit of clearing yourself." Bernice chuckled, surprised at how perceptive the woman was. "I guess you could say that. I'm here visiting my daughter, trying to find my way, I guess. But it's been harder than I thought." The woman nodded knowingly. "Starting over is never easy. It takes time. But sometimes you have to go through the rough patches to find the smooth ones." Bernice sat in silence for a moment, processing the woman's words. She didn't know why, but something about this woman's calm demeanor made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't so alone in her journey after all. "Do you mind if I ask how you found peace?" Bernice asked quietly. It wasn't a question she had planned to ask, but it felt right. The woman's smile softened, and she looked out over the water again. "I found it in the small things, in the quiet moments. The world will keep spinning, whether we're ready or not. But sometimes we just need to stop chasing after it and let it come to us." Bernice absorbed the words, feeling them sink deep into her heart. It was a simple concept, but it felt like the answer to a question she hadn't even known she was asking. "Thank you," Bernice said, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman simply nodded as if she had already given Bernice everything she needed. Later that evening, Bernice returned to Tanya's apartment, her mind spinning with the conversation she had had with the woman in the park. There was something peaceful about the way she had spoken, something that made Bernice feel like maybe, just maybe, she could stop fighting so hard against the current and start letting herself flow with it. When Tanya arrived home, Bernice was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of tea in front of her, deep in thought. "You look better," Tanya said as she set her bag down on the counter. "How was your day?" Bernice smiled softly. "It was good. I met someone in the park today. She said something that really made me think." Tanya raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What did she say?" Bernice took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the words as she spoke them. "She told me that sometimes you have to stop chasing after peace and let it come to you." Tanya looked at her mother for a long moment, her expression softening. "That sounds like some good advice." Bernice nodded slowly. "It does. I've been trying so hard to figure everything out, to force things to make sense. Maybe I need to just, let go a little." Tanya walked over and sat down across from Bernice. "You don't have to have everything figured out right now. I think maybe you just need to give yourself some time. You've been through a lot, but it doesn't mean you have to carry it all by yourself." Bernice felt a lump form in her throat, her eyes welling with unshed tears. She hadn't realized how much she had needed to hear that. It wasn't just about her daughter's words, it was the understanding, the validation that it was okay to not have all the answers. "I've been so afraid," Bernice confessed, her voice trembling slightly. "Afraid that if I don't figure it out, I'll lose myself completely. But maybe I've been trying to hold on to something that's already gone." Tanya reached across the table and took her mother's hand. "You don't have to figure it out all at once. Just take it one day at a time. We're in this together, okay?" For the first time since arriving in Seattle, Bernice felt a weight lift off her shoulders. Tanya wasn't pushing her to be anything other than who she was right now. She wasn't asking her to be the same mother she had been before. It was a moment of understanding, a moment of peace. "Okay," Bernice said softly, squeezing her daughter's hand in return. one day at a time. That night, as Bernice lay in bed, she felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. For the first time in months, the weight of grief and uncertainty didn't feel so heavy. Maybe she didn't need to have everything figured out. Maybe the peace she had been searching for was already within her, waiting to be found. She closed her eyes and let the quiet of the apartment wash over her. Tomorrow would be a new day, and for the first time in a long time, she was ready to meet it with an open heart. The morning light filtered through the blinds of Tanya's apartment, casting soft shadows on the walls. Bernice had been awake for a while, lying there in the stillness of the room. She listened to the faint hum of the city outside, the distant sounds of cars and people moving about their day. It was still early, and she had always been an early riser. But today felt different. Today she had made a decision, a quiet but firm one. She wasn't going to let herself be paralyzed by the fear of what was ahead. She wasn't going to keep hiding from the unknown, hoping it would go away. She was ready to take control of her time, of her life. Slowly but surely. Bernice stood up, stretching her arms above her head, feeling the tension in her back loosen. She walked to the kitchen where a mug sat waiting for her favorite blue ceramic cup. As she poured herself a cup of coffee, she thought about the woman in the park again, the words she had shared. She needed to stop chasing peace. She needed to embrace it when it came, even if it came in small, quiet moments. Tanya came into the kitchen a few minutes later, rubbing her eyes. She was still in her pajamas, looking like she had just rolled out of bed. "Morning," Tanya said, her voice still thick with sleep. "I didn't expect you to be up this early." Bernice smiled softly, handing her daughter a mug of coffee. "I couldn't sleep much, but I'm feeling better today." Tanya raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Better? In what way?" Bernice took a sip of her coffee and looked out the window, watching the light slowly fill the room. "I think I've been holding on to the wrong things, trying to fix everything when really I just need to let go a little. Stop forcing it." Tanya sat down across from her, watching her mother closely. "That sounds like a good shift. Are you feeling okay, though? You know you don't have to carry everything alone, right?" Bernice looked at her daughter, the sincerity in her eyes making Bernice's heart swell. "I do now. I think I've been afraid for so long that I forgot that I have people who care about me, and that I don't need to do it all by myself." Tanya smiled, her face softening. "I'm really glad to hear you say that. I know it's been tough, but I'm here, Mom. Always." Bernice nodded, feeling a deep sense of comfort. There was still a lot of uncertainty, but at least she wasn't facing it alone anymore. She had come here seeking change, and it was happening, bit by bit. That afternoon, Bernice took a walk down the busy streets of Seattle again. But today, it didn't feel as overwhelming. She wasn't trying to find herself or prove anything to anyone. She was simply enjoying the day, letting the world unfold around her. She stopped at a small bookstore on a street corner, the sign hanging above the door, reading "The Cozy Corner." It was a quaint little shop, the kind that felt like it had been there forever. The smell of old books and fresh coffee filled the air as she stepped inside. The shop was quiet, except for the soft rustle of pages turning and the occasional clink of a cup being set down. Bernice wandered through the aisles, running her fingers along the spines of the books. There was something calming about being surrounded by stories, by the possibility of new beginnings that each book held. She found a chair by the window, a cozy nook that looked out onto the street. She picked up a book she had seen on the shelf, an old classic that her mother had once loved, and began to read. As she sat there, absorbed in the pages, Bernice felt a small spark of something, something like hope. It wasn't a big, dramatic moment. It wasn't the sudden flash of clarity she had been searching for. It was a quiet moment, just her, a book, and the world outside. And for the first time in a long time, she felt okay with it. That evening, Tanya came home, looking tired but in a good mood. She had been busy with work, but tonight she seemed more relaxed than usual. "Hey, Mom," Tanya said as she dropped her bag on the couch. "How was your day?" Bernice looked up from the book she was reading. "It was good. I went for a walk, found a little bookstore. I even sat down and read for a bit. It felt nice." Tanya smiled, clearly pleased. "That sounds great. I'm really glad to hear that." Bernice nodded, closing the book gently. I think I think I'm starting to find my way. Slowly but surely. Tanya sat down next to her. You know, I think I'm starting to see it too. You're really trying, Mom. And that means a lot. There was a brief silence between them, but it wasn't awkward. It was comfortable. And in that quiet moment, Bernice realized that for the first time in a while, she wasn't just waiting for something to change. She was making it happen herself. I'm proud of you, Mom, Tanya added, her voice soft but filled with warmth. Bernice felt a lump rise in her throat at her daughter's words. She didn't say anything for a moment, just absorbed the kindness in the air. It had been so long since she had felt proud of herself, but now for the first time, she felt like she had a reason to be. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I'm proud of myself too. Later that night, as Bernice lay in bed, she thought about how much had changed in such a short time. She had come to Seattle unsure of herself, unsure of her place in the world. But now for the first time, she felt like maybe she was on the right path. Maybe the journey wasn't about fixing everything all at once. Maybe it was just about taking the next step. With a deep breath, Bernice closed her eyes and let herself rest. Tomorrow would be another day, and she was ready for whatever it might bring. The next few days passed with a quiet sort of ease. It wasn't a rush of excitement or a dramatic shift, just the steady, gradual pace of life moving forward. For Bernice, this was a welcome change. After so many months of feeling like she was stuck in place trying to catch her breath, she was starting to appreciate the calm. Tanya had been a little more present, coming home earlier in the evenings, and they spent time together over dinner or talking on the couch. It wasn't perfect, but it felt more natural. Bernice didn't feel the need to push, to make things happen immediately. She had learned to take things one day at a time. One afternoon, as she was walking through the local farmer's market, Bernice noticed a sign for a free art class at a nearby community center. It was a simple thing, really, just a small sign by a booth with a few paintbrushes on it, but it caught her eye. She had never considered herself an artist, but something about the idea of sitting down with paint and brushes, of making something from scratch, appealed to her. It wasn't just about creating art. It was about creating something for herself, a small, quiet expression of who she was. Before she even thought about it, Bernice found herself walking toward the booth, signing up for the class. That evening, she told Tanya about the class. I think I'm going to try painting, Bernice said with a small laugh. It's just a class, but I thought it might be fun. Maybe I'll be terrible, but it might be something to do. Tanya looked up from her laptop, raising an eyebrow in surprise. You? Paint? That's unexpected. Bernice smiled, feeling a little lighter than she had in weeks. I know, right? I'm not sure what to expect. But maybe that's the point. Tanya leaned back in her chair, her expression softening. You're really starting to do things for yourself, huh? Bernice paused, reflecting on the truth of her daughter's words. It wasn't just about signing up for the class. It was about doing something without needing permission, without feeling like she was in anyone's way. I guess I am, she said slowly. And maybe that's exactly what I need. The following Tuesday, Bernice walked into the community center for her first art class, a little nervous but also excited. It was a small room filled with easels and people of all ages. The instructor, a cheerful woman named Linda, welcomed her with a smile. It's your first time? Linda asked as she handed Bernice a small canvas and some paint. Bernice nodded, glancing around the room at the other students. Yes, I'm not really sure what I'm doing, though. That's the fun part, Linda said with a wink. You don't need to know. Just let it happen. And so she did. Bernice picked up her paintbrush and began to move it across the canvas, unsure of what she was creating, but letting her hand guide her. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of freedom. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about doing it the right way. It was just about expressing herself in a way she hadn't done in years. By the time the class ended, Bernice found herself smiling at the simple mess of color she had made. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She hadn't tried to control it, hadn't worried about whether it was good enough. It was just a moment where she could be herself. That evening, Bernice brought the painting back to Tanya's apartment. When Tanya saw it, she raised an eyebrow in surprise. Well, look at you, Tanya said, walking over to inspect it. It's different. Bernice laughed, holding it up for a better view. I know, but it's mine. Tanya smiled and gave her mother a hug. I'm proud of you, Mom. You're really doing it. Bernice felt a warmth in her chest at her daughter's words. For the first time in a long time, she realized how much Tanya's approval meant. Not because she needed it, but because it reminded her that she was still a part of her daughter's life. She was still important. The next few weeks were filled with small moments like this. Bernice continued attending the art class, finding herself more and more immersed in the process. It wasn't about the final product. It was about the experience, the freedom to create without judgment. Tanya and Bernice also spent more time together. It wasn't perfect, but the distance between them was closing. Tanya started talking about her own struggles at work, and Bernice, for the first time, felt like she wasn't the only one with burdens to carry. They were both just trying to figure things out, and for the first time, it didn't feel like they were worlds apart. One evening after dinner, Tanya looked at her mom, a thoughtful expression on her face. Mom, I've been thinking, maybe it's time we start looking at things differently. I know you're still finding your footing here, but I think there's a way for us to make this work. Bernice's heart swelled at the words. She hadn't realized how much she needed that reassurance. You're right, she said softly. Maybe I've been holding on to things too tightly, but I'm ready to let go. Tanya smiled, and in that moment, Bernice knew that they were both ready to face whatever came next. Not as mother and daughter, but as two people who had learned to support each other through life's challenges. And as the evening wound down, Bernice felt a quiet peace settle over her. She wasn't sure where the road ahead would lead, but she knew that for the first time in a long time, she was walking it with her head held high. The days in Seattle seemed to stretch out a little longer, filled with new experiences and quiet realizations. Bernice continued to immerse herself in the art class, and with each brushstroke, she found herself shedding old layers of fear and uncertainty. Painting became a form of therapy, a way to express the emotions she hadn't known how to process since Walter's death. But it wasn't just the painting that was changing things for Bernice. It was the connection she was beginning to rebuild, not just with Tanya, but with herself. She had spent so many years living in the shadow of her past life, trying to hold on to what was gone, that she had forgotten how to move forward. But now, every small step felt like a victory. One Saturday afternoon after her art class, Bernice found herself sitting on a bench at a local park. The weather was warm, and the sun cast a golden light over the grass, making the whole scene feel like a picture out of a dream. People were walking by, some with dogs, some with children, and for the first time in a while, Bernice didn't feel completely alone. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through the few photos she had taken in Seattle so far. Tanya had sent her a text earlier that morning, saying she would be home late again, caught up with work. Bernice had learned not to take it personally. Her daughter's career was important, and Bernice was no longer the center of her world. And maybe that was okay. As she was about to put her phone back in her bag, a voice interrupted her. Excuse me, is this seat taken? Bernice looked up to see a man standing in front of her, holding a small dog on a leash. He was older than her, with graying hair and a warm smile, and something about him seemed familiar, though she couldn't place him at first. No, it's free, she replied, gesturing to the empty space next to her. The man smiled and sat down beside her, the dog curling up at his feet. Good thing, he said with a chuckle. I wasn't sure where I was going to sit with this little guy pulling me all over the place. Bernice smiled, looking down at the dog. He looks like he has a lot of energy. Oh, he does. His name's Max. He's my walking buddy, whether I'm in the mood for it or not. They both laughed, and for a moment the world around them seemed to fade. There was something about this man's easy demeanor that made Bernice feel comfortable. She hadn't expected a conversation today, but she welcomed it. I'm Bernice, she said, extending her hand. I'm visiting my daughter here. The man shook her hand, his grip firm but friendly. Nice to meet you, Bernice. I'm Jack. I've been living here for a while now. My daughter lives here too, actually. But like yours, she's busy with work most of the time. Bernice nodded, a small laugh escaping her. Sounds familiar. Jack smiled knowingly. It's funny, isn't it? When they're little, you're everything to them. But then, as they grow up, they have their own lives, their own plans. And sometimes it's hard to find your place in it all. Bernice felt a pang in her chest. It wasn't just the feeling of being left behind. It was the realization that she had spent so much time clinging to a version of her life that no longer existed. But Jack's words were different. They didn't make her feel sorry for herself. They made her feel understood. "I know exactly what you mean," Bernice said, looking out at the park. "I've been feeling that way a lot lately, like I don't know where I fit in anymore." Jack tilted his head slightly, his expression softening. "I think that's something a lot of people go through, whether they're older or younger. The trick is not to get stuck in it. Find something new, even if it's small." Bernice thought about that for a moment. She had been so focused on trying to get back to what she had lost, to the life she had shared with Walter, that she hadn't given herself the space to find something new. "You sound like you know what you're talking about," Bernice said, a smile tugging at her lips. Jack chuckled. "I've had a lot of practice. It's not easy, but it's worth it. You just have to keep moving forward." As they continued talking, Bernice felt a strange sense of relief. Jack wasn't offering her solutions. He wasn't telling her how to fix everything. But there was something comforting about his presence, something that told her she wasn't alone in this struggle. Later that evening, after Jack had left, Bernice returned to Tanya's apartment, her mind swirling with the conversation. She was starting to see things differently. She didn't need to have everything figured out right now. It was okay to take things slowly, to allow herself the space to discover new parts of who she was. It was a small step, but it was the first one toward something new. When Tanya arrived home later that night, Bernice was sitting at the kitchen table sipping her tea. Tanya smiled as she walked in, her briefcase in hand. "Hey, Mom, how was your day?" Tanya asked, setting her things down. "It was good," Bernice replied, looking up at her daughter. "I met someone at the park. We talked for a while." Tanya raised an eyebrow. "Someone you know?" "No," Bernice said with a soft smile. "Just a man with a dog. But we talked about life, about how it's okay to feel lost sometimes, and about how you can still find your way, even if you're not sure what that looks like yet." Tanya's expression softened, and she walked over to sit beside her mother. "I'm glad you're talking to people. I've noticed you seem a little more at peace lately." Bernice shrugged, a modest smile tugging at her lips. "I think I'm starting to get there. Slowly." As Bernice settled into bed that night, the quiet of the apartment felt different. Not empty, not lonely, but calm. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't searching for something she had lost. She wasn't trying to find her way back. She was simply being. Tomorrow she would take another step. Maybe it would be small, but it would be hers. And that was enough. The next morning, Bernice awoke with a quiet sense of purpose. The sun was shining through the window, casting a warm glow over the apartment. She stretched out, feeling the weight of the past few days lift ever so slightly from her shoulders. It was a feeling she hadn't known in a long time. Lightness, a sense of possibility. The past week had been full of small, meaningful moments. She had spent time exploring the city, meeting new people, and most importantly, rediscovering parts of herself that she had long neglected. It wasn't that she had figured everything out. She knew the road ahead would still be filled with uncertainty. But for the first time since she had arrived in Seattle, Bernice felt like she was no longer drifting. She had begun to carve out a place for herself in this unfamiliar world, one step at a time. That morning, after a cup of coffee, Bernice decided to take a walk. She hadn't been to the water in a few days, and she was drawn to it again. The sound of the waves, the way the sunlight danced on the surface, was calming to her. It reminded her that the world was always moving, always changing, and that she was part of it. As she walked along the shore, she reflected on how much had shifted in her life over the past few months. Coming to Seattle had felt like a huge leap into the unknown, and yet it was one of the best decisions she had made. She was beginning to find her footing again. After some time, Bernice came across a small bench overlooking the water. She sat down, pulling her jacket tighter against the cool breeze, and let her gaze wander across the lake. It was peaceful here, the kind of peace that allowed her to think without the weight of the world pressing in on her. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the sound of the water lapping against the shore, when she felt the familiar sensation of someone sitting beside her. Startled, Bernice opened her eyes and turned to see the man from the park. Jack. His presence was easy, calm, as though he had just appeared out of thin air. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, a playful glint in his eyes. "Not at all," Bernice replied, giving him a small smile. Jack sat down beside her, his dog, Max, at his feet once again. For a few moments they sat in comfortable silence, watching the water and listening to the distant sounds of the city. "Funny how quiet it can be in the middle of a busy place, isn't it?" Jack said, breaking the silence. "You get so caught up in the noise of everything that you forget there's this calm just waiting for you." Bernice nodded, looking out at the water. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately, about how I've spent so much time trying to fill the silence, trying to find something to make sense of everything. But maybe the silence is what I need to listen to." Jack turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "That's the key, isn't it? Sometimes you have to stop chasing the noise and just listen." Bernice sighed softly, feeling a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying begin to lift. "I've spent so much time thinking I had to fix everything. I thought if I could just find the right answer, everything would fall into place. But it's not about fixing, it's about letting go." Jack's smile widened, a knowing look in his eyes. "Exactly. You can't fix what's already gone, but you can start to live with it. It becomes part of who you are, not something you need to constantly fight against." Bernice looked at him, a question forming in her mind. "How did you get to that place?" she asked quietly. "How did you learn to let go?" Jack's expression softened as he thought for a moment. "I think it comes with time. You learn that life doesn't always go the way you want it to, and that's okay. The real peace comes when you stop expecting everything to be perfect. You have to learn to accept the mess, the uncertainty." Bernice felt a stirring inside her, a sense of clarity that she hadn't had before. She had been so afraid of the uncertainty, so terrified of letting go of the past, that she hadn't seen the freedom it could bring. "It's like painting," she said, surprising herself with the analogy. "At first, you try to control every stroke, make everything just right. But sometimes the most beautiful pieces come from the messy parts, the ones you didn't plan." Jack chuckled, glancing at Max, who was now chasing a stick nearby. "I think you're onto something there. Life's a lot like a canvas. We just need to let ourselves be okay with the mess." They both laughed, the sound of it filling the quiet space between them. For a brief moment, Bernice felt like she wasn't just surviving, she was living. She wasn't waiting for everything to make sense. She was allowing herself to be part of the flow, accepting that some things were beyond her control. As the afternoon wore on, the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the water. Bernice stood up, stretching her legs. She looked at Jack, feeling a quiet appreciation for the conversation they had shared. "Thank you, Jack," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "I didn't expect to come here today and feel clearer." Jack stood as well, smiling at her. "You're welcome, Bernice. Sometimes all it takes is a little bit of listening and a whole lot of letting go." With that, Bernice turned and started walking back toward the city. She knew that this wasn't the end of her journey. It was just another step. And for the first time in a long time, she felt confident that whatever came next, she was ready to meet it. As Bernice returned to Tanya's apartment, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She wasn't expecting to have everything figured out overnight, but she was beginning to understand something important. The path forward wasn't about having all the answers. It was about allowing herself to take the first step, no matter how small, and trusting that she would find her way. When Tanya came home that evening, Bernice was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. Tanya walked in, setting down her bag with a sigh. "Hey, Mom, how was your day?" Tanya asked, her voice a little softer than usual. "It was good," Bernice said with a smile. "I think I'm finally starting to see things a little clearer." Tanya raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Bernice leaned back in her chair, feeling a quiet sense of pride in herself. "I've realized that it's okay not to have all the answers. It's okay to just let things unfold." Tanya smiled, walking over to her and sitting down beside her. "I'm glad to hear that. I think you're really starting to find your way, Mom." Bernice nodded, a quiet sense of peace settling in her heart. She wasn't sure what the future would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of it. She was ready to face whatever came next, one step at a time. The next few days felt like the beginning of something new. Bernice had spent the last few months figuring out her own sense of self again, and for the first time in a long time, she was feeling less like a visitor in her own life. Her morning walks to the park, her art classes, the casual conversations with strangers, everything was adding up. She wasn't just passing through anymore. She was living. Still, there was something lingering between her and Tanya. It wasn't anything overt, but the distance between them had started to feel more noticeable. Tanya was working long hours, and Bernice couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the physical distance, though Tanya's constant work commitments made her less available. It was as if there were unspoken words between them, things neither of them was ready to address. It wasn't that Tanya had been unkind. In fact, the small moments they did share, like the quiet dinners or the times Tanya would ask her how her day went, were filled with love. But there was a quiet unease that lingered in the air, a feeling of something being left unsaid. On a Thursday evening, after Tanya had come home from another late shift at work, Bernice found herself sitting at the kitchen table again, nervously twisting the edge of a napkin between her fingers. Tanya had made a point to come in for dinner, but it was clear she was still exhausted, her eyes tired from the long day. "Mom, I'm really sorry about this week. I know I've been a little distant," Tanya said, her voice softer than usual. She set her bag down, rubbing her eyes. "Work's been crazy, and I didn't mean to make you feel like I'm avoiding you." Bernice had been waiting for this moment, even if she hadn't quite known it. She had felt the shift in the air, had sensed her daughter's subtle withdrawal, but now that it was finally being addressed, Bernice was at a loss for words. She hadn't meant to let it build up, but somewhere along the way she had allowed herself to feel unimportant, even though Tanya never intended to make her feel that way. "It's okay," Bernice said quietly, looking down at her hands. "I know you're busy, Tanya, but I can't help feeling like I'm in the way sometimes." Tanya looked at her, confusion flashing across her face. "What do you mean?" "You're not in the way, I guess I've been so caught up in everything. You know how it is with work, and I didn't even realize you were feeling like this." Bernice took a deep breath, her chest tight with emotions she had been trying to keep at bay. "I came here thinking I would be okay. I thought it would be simple. But Tanya, I'm not the same person I was before. And I think you're not either. I'm not sure where I fit in anymore." Tanya sat down beside her, her face softening. "Mom, I never meant for you to feel like that. I want you here, but I also know I've been kind of overwhelmed. I didn't mean to shut you out. It's just, things are changing so quickly in my life, and I don't want you to feel like I don't need you, because I do." The words hung in the air between them, a simple acknowledgement of the truth they had both been avoiding. Bernice realized that Tanya was struggling too, just in her own way. Her daughter had her own life, her own demands, and it wasn't easy for her to balance it all. "I understand, Tanya," Bernice said softly. "It's just hard for me to feel like I don't know where I belong. You've made your life here, and I'm still figuring out how I fit in it." Tanya reached out, taking her mother's hand in her own. "You belong here with me. You always have. I just need to figure out how to give us both the space we need." Bernice squeezed her hand gently. "I think I need to let go of some things too. I can't keep holding on to what was or who I was before. I need to let myself change." Tanya nodded, her eyes glistening with a mixture of relief and understanding. "We're both changing, aren't we?" she said quietly. "And that's okay. We don't have to have it all figured out. We just need to be there for each other." For the first time in a while, Bernice felt a quiet peace settle in her chest. The tension that had been building between them began to fade, replaced with the warmth of understanding. She wasn't alone in this journey. Tanya was right there with her, in her own way. The following week, Tanya surprised Bernice by suggesting they spend the day together. "Let's go out tomorrow. We'll do something fun, just the two of us. I think we both need a little break." Bernice smiled, feeling a sense of gratitude wash over her. "I'd like that," she said softly. The next day they explored the city, visiting local shops, having lunch at a cafe, and laughing over small things they hadn't talked about in years. For the first time, it didn't feel like there was a divide between them. The silence wasn't there anymore. It was replaced by the simple joy of just being together. As they walked through the bustling streets, Tanya turned to her mom, her face relaxed. You know, I've been thinking a lot about everything. I don't know if you feel it, but I think we're both finding our way. I'm glad you're here with me. Bernice nodded, a small, content smile on her face. I'm glad too. And in that moment, with the sun shining down on them and the city bustling around them, Bernice realized that maybe, just maybe, she had found where she belonged. Not in the past, and not in the life she had left behind, but in this new chapter, with Tanya, with herself, and with the possibilities ahead. The following weeks passed in a gentle, yet purposeful flow. Bernice had become more comfortable in her new routine. The art classes, her morning walks, and the occasional lunch dates with Tanya all became small, meaningful parts of her life in Seattle. It wasn't the same as her life back home, and it wasn't the life she had once known with Walter, but there was something peaceful about it. Something real. One afternoon, as she sat in a local cafe sipping her coffee, Bernice thought back on how much had changed since she first arrived in Seattle. Back then, she had felt like a stranger in her own life. Now, though, she was beginning to feel like she was carving out a place for herself in this new chapter. It wasn't easy, but it was something. Her phone buzzed on the table, pulling her out of her thoughts. She picked it up to see a message from Tanya. Mom, there's something I need to tell you. Can we talk when you get home? A knot of worry tightened in Bernice's chest. The tone of Tanya's message felt serious, and for a moment, she wondered if something was wrong. Was Tanya upset with her again? Had she done something to push her away? Bernice tried to shake off the worry, reminding herself that they had been making progress. Still, her heart raced a little faster as she paid for her coffee and gathered her things, heading back to the apartment. When she arrived, Tanya was already sitting at the kitchen table, her expression thoughtful. She looked up as Bernice walked in, a soft smile on her lips, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Hey, Mom, Tanya said, motioning for Bernice to sit down. I'm glad you're home. Bernice sat down across from her daughter, a mix of curiosity and concern building inside her. What's going on, Tanya? Your message sounded serious. Tanya sighed, clearly working through something in her mind before she spoke. I've been thinking a lot about everything, about us. And well, I don't know how to say this, but I think I need to start making some changes. I've realized that I've been holding on to some things from the past, things that I'm not really ready to let go of yet. Bernice's heart skipped a beat. Her daughter's words, though careful and measured, sent a ripple of confusion through her. What do you mean? Bernice asked softly. What are you holding on to? Tanya's voice wavered, but she spoke honestly. I think I've been holding on to the idea that things could go back to how they were before you left, before everything changed. I've been pretending that I'm okay with everything being different, but I'm not. I've been afraid to admit that I'm not ready for things to change between us. I don't know if that makes sense. Bernice felt a pang of guilt. She had come here to start a new life, but in doing so, she hadn't realized how much her presence in Seattle was affecting Tanya. She had been so focused on her own healing that she hadn't truly understood the weight Tanya had been carrying. Tanya, I'm sorry, Bernice said, her voice low and steady. I never meant to push you away or make things harder for you. I didn't know how to be here without losing myself, but I see now that you're struggling too. Tanya looked at her mother, her eyes filled with emotion. I know, and I don't want you to feel like you have to leave or change anything just for me. But I also don't know how to balance everything. You, my job, my life here. It feels like I'm losing myself in the process. Bernice reached across the table, placing her hand gently over Tanya's. You don't have to do this alone, Tanya. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. And I'll always support you, no matter how hard it gets. But we can't keep pretending everything's fine if we're both holding on to things that aren't working anymore. Tanya nodded, her face softening. I think I've been afraid to admit that. Afraid to admit that things are different now. I've been scared that if I say it out loud, it'll make it more real. Bernice squeezed her daughter's hand, her heart swelling with love. I think it already is real, honey. But that doesn't mean it's the end. It just means we have to figure out how to navigate it. Together. Tanya's eyes filled with tears, and she pulled her mother into a hug. "Thank you, Mom. I'm sorry I've been distant." Bernice held her tightly, feeling the strength of their connection growing with each passing moment. "There's nothing to apologize for. We're both finding our way." Later that evening, after a long and meaningful conversation, Tanya and Bernice sat together on the couch, sharing a quiet dinner. The unease between them had dissipated, replaced by an understanding that felt deeper than it had in a long time. Bernice realized that her journey wasn't just about finding herself. It was about finding a way to be present for the people she loved, especially Tanya. She hadn't expected things to be perfect, but she had come to understand that the imperfections were what made their relationship stronger, what made them human. As they finished dinner, Tanya turned to her mother with a small smile. "You know, I've been thinking, maybe we should start a new tradition, one that's just for us." Bernice raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" Tanya grinned. "How about a weekly movie night? Just you and me. No work, no distractions, just us." Bernice laughed, feeling a warmth spread through her. "I love that idea." And in that moment, as the evening stretched on and they picked out a movie to watch, Bernice realized something. She wasn't just starting over in Seattle. She was learning how to build new memories, new traditions, with the people who mattered most. The weeks following their heart-to-heart conversation felt like a turning point for both Bernice and Tanya. The tension that had once hovered between them, unspoken and heavy, began to dissolve, replaced by a quieter, more grounded understanding. Bernice felt the change not just in her relationship with her daughter, but in herself as well. She no longer felt like a visitor in Tanya's life, as if she were simply passing through. Instead, she felt like she was beginning to settle into her new place in this unfamiliar world. Tanya's busy work schedule hadn't slowed down, but she made a conscious effort to spend more time with her mother. They continued their weekly movie nights, laughing and bonding over silly comedies and nostalgic classics. Even the small things, like cooking dinner together or sitting on the balcony with cups of tea, became moments they cherished. As for Bernice, she continued to explore her own interests. Her painting classes had become a source of joy, and she was starting to feel a connection to her work that went beyond just the strokes of a brush. It was a creative outlet, a way to express herself in a language she had never truly understood before. For the first time in a long time, she was creating something purely for herself. One Saturday afternoon, as Bernice was walking back from the art supply store, she passed by the small park near the community center. The weather was warm, and the park was bustling with activity, children running around, couples strolling hand in hand, and the occasional dog chasing a ball. Bernice slowed her pace, taking in the scene, her mind drifting to the quiet moments she had been savoring lately. It was then that she noticed someone familiar sitting on a bench under a tree. It was Jack, the man she had met in the park weeks ago. He was alone this time, a book in his hands and Max, his dog, lying peacefully at his feet. Bernice felt a pull to go over and say hello. She hadn't seen him since that day by the water, and something about the peacefulness of the moment made her want to reconnect. As she approached, Jack looked up and smiled, his face lighting up when he saw her. "Well, if it isn't the artist herself," he said with a grin. "What brings you back here?" Bernice smiled, feeling a sense of comfort in his presence. "I was just out for a walk and saw you sitting here. Thought I'd come say hi." Jack patted the empty spot next to him on the bench. "You're always welcome to join me. I'm usually here on Saturdays just reading or thinking, or sometimes just listening to the world." Bernice sat down beside him, taking in the peaceful surroundings. Max, who had been quietly dozing, perked up at her arrival and gave her a gentle nudge with his nose. She laughed, petting the dog's head. "He's a sweet dog." Jack nodded, his gaze soft. "He's my companion. After everything, I don't know what I'd do without him." Bernice didn't need to ask what he meant by everything. She could see it in his eyes. The weariness of life's trials, the kind of quiet strength that only came from enduring loss and learning to keep moving forward. "I know what you mean," Bernice said softly. "I've been learning that too. Not everything is as it was, and maybe it never will be. But that doesn't mean we can't still find a way to move forward, right?" Jack smiled, his eyes meeting hers with a knowing look. "That's exactly it. We move forward, even if it's one step at a time. They sat in silence for a moment, both lost in their thoughts but somehow comforted by the shared understanding between them. "Do you ever think about what's next?" Bernice asked suddenly, the question surprising herself as much as it did Jack. He raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean by what's next?" "I mean, for the future. I've been thinking a lot about it lately, about what comes after all the changes. I'm here in Seattle, trying to rebuild my life, but sometimes I wonder if I'll ever truly find a place where I belong again." Jack seemed to consider her words for a moment before responding. "I think that's the trick, Bernice. It's not about finding a place that makes you feel like you belong. It's about creating that place for yourself, wherever you are. It's about accepting that the world won't always be what we expect, and that's okay. Sometimes we have to let go of the idea that things need to be perfect and just embrace what's in front of us." His words were simple, but they struck a chord with Bernice. She had been searching for a sense of belonging, a place to anchor herself. But perhaps, as Jack said, she needed to create that sense of peace within herself first. She looked out at the park, at the people living their lives, each of them doing their best to navigate their own struggles. They weren't waiting for something to happen. They were simply living. Maybe that was the key. Maybe it wasn't about waiting for life to fit into the picture she had once imagined. Maybe it was about painting her own picture, one brushstroke at a time. "I think you're right," Bernice said quietly. "It's not about finding a place to belong. It's about learning to belong to yourself." Jack smiled, his eyes warm. "Exactly. And once you do that, everything else seems to fall into place." That evening, as Bernice returned to Tanya's apartment, she felt a renewed sense of clarity. She wasn't looking for some grand moment of change anymore. She was simply embracing the journey with all its uncertainties and imperfections. She had learned to let go of the past, and in doing so, she had found something even more important: the ability to live fully in the present. As Tanya came home later that night, Bernice was sitting on the couch, reading one of the books she had brought from home. When Tanya walked in, she looked at her mother, a soft smile on her lips. "You look different, Mom," Tanya said. "Like you figured something out." Bernice looked up from her book, her heart swelling at the love and understanding in her daughter's eyes. "I think I'm starting to." Tanya joined her on the couch, resting her head on Bernice's shoulder. "I'm really glad you're here, Mom." Bernice wrapped her arm around Tanya, pulling her close. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." And for the first time in a long time, Bernice felt at peace, knowing that no matter where life led her, she was ready to face it. Bernice woke up early the next morning, the sunlight peeking through the window, casting soft beams across the room. There was something about the quiet of the morning that always made her feel more centered, more connected to the present moment. It wasn't the rush of the day that had her feeling this way, but the slow, deliberate moments before everything started. The ones where she could take a breath and just exist. Today, however, felt different. After weeks of settling into the rhythms of Seattle, she felt like something was shifting again. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, a quiet realization that she was on the edge of something new, something she hadn't fully understood yet. As she made her coffee and sat at the kitchen table, Bernice reflected on everything that had changed since she arrived. She had come here searching for a fresh start, a way to reclaim her life after losing Walter. At first, she had felt disconnected, like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. But now things were starting to feel like they were coming together. She was finding new patterns, new joys, and new moments of connection, not just with Tanya, but with herself. But there was still more to explore, more to understand. The art classes were going well. Her paintings, though simple, had started to tell stories she hadn't been able to put into words. It wasn't about creating masterpieces. It was about the process, the act of bringing something to life with her own hands. She was letting go of perfection, embracing the imperfections, and in that, she had found a small sense of freedom. Her bond with Tanya had deepened too. They were still figuring things out, still adjusting to this new dynamic. But there was less tension now. They had both allowed the space for change, for the messy process of growth, and that had made all the difference. But there was something else, something she had been avoiding, though she wasn't sure why. Bernice had been hesitant to reach out to old friends. She had left everything behind in her hometown, not just Walter, but the community, the familiar faces, the places that once felt like home. She had told herself that she needed a fresh start, but now after months of settling into this new life, she felt the pull to reconnect with the past. It was a soft, persistent tug in her heart, a reminder that the past, though gone, still held pieces of her. Later that afternoon, Bernice found herself sitting at her computer, staring at the email address of an old friend from home, Miriam. They had been close when their children were younger, and Miriam had always been someone Bernice could confide in. But after Walter's death, Bernice had withdrawn. She hadn't reached out to Miriam, or anyone for that matter. The loneliness had been too much, and the thought of reconnecting felt overwhelming. But now as Bernice sat there, she realized that it wasn't just about missing the past. It was about reclaiming parts of herself she had set aside, parts that hadn't gone away, even though she had tried to bury them. With a deep breath, she clicked compose and began typing. Subject: checking in. Hi Miriam, I hope this finds you well. I've been thinking about you a lot lately, and I realized how long it's been since we've talked. I've been in Seattle for the past few months trying to start fresh, and while things have been better than I expected, I can't help but miss the comfort of old friendships. I'd love to catch up and hear how things are going with you and the family. Hope to hear from you soon. Take care, Bernice. Bernice hesitated before hitting send. She wondered if she had waited too long, if too much time had passed for their friendship to pick up where it left off. But then she reminded herself, time might change things, but it didn't erase them. She could always try. She hit send and sat back, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. She had reached out. She had opened the door to something she had been avoiding, and it felt right. A few days later, Bernice received a reply from Miriam. Subject: Re. Checking in, Bernice. I can't tell you how happy I was to see your email. It's been far too long, and I've missed you more than I realized. I can't imagine how hard it's been for you after Walter passed, but I'm so proud of you for taking this step and moving to Seattle. I'd love to catch up and hear all about what you've been up to. I'm in town next weekend for a conference. How about we meet up for lunch? It would be so good to see you. Sending you all my love, Miriam. Reading Miriam's email, Bernice felt a rush of emotions. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear from someone who knew her before all the loss, someone who could remind her of who she used to be before grief had taken over. It wasn't just about reconnecting with her past. It was about honoring it, acknowledging that it was still a part of her and that it could coexist with the life she was building now. She immediately responded, confirming a time to meet up next weekend. That Saturday, when the day of their lunch arrived, Bernice stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her blouse. For the first time in a while, she felt a flutter of excitement. She was going to meet an old friend, someone who had witnessed her life before, and now they would reconnect in this new chapter. When she arrived at the restaurant, Miriam was already there, waiting for her at a small corner table. As soon as Bernice walked in, Miriam stood up, and they shared a warm, long embrace. You look amazing, Miriam said, pulling back slightly to look at Bernice with bright, kind eyes. Bernice smiled, feeling a lump in her throat. I feel like a different person, to be honest. They sat down and talked for hours, about everything, about the changes in Bernice's life, the ups and downs, the art class, the city, and Tanya. They talked about old memories, their children, and what had happened in the years since they last spoke. Bernice didn't realize how much she had missed this until she was in the middle of it. This familiar connection, this reminder of who she was before all the hurt. By the time they said their goodbyes, Bernice felt lighter. Reconnecting with Miriam had given her a sense of closure, a sense of continuity. She realized that the road ahead wasn't about forgetting the past, but about carrying it with her while still embracing the present. That evening, as Bernice walked back to Tanya's apartment, she felt a sense of peace settling over her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew that she was exactly where she needed to be. The past and the present, the old and the new. Both were part of her, and that was okay. The weeks that followed her lunch with Miriam brought a renewed sense of clarity to Bernice. Reconnecting with an old friend had reminded her of the importance of allowing herself to remember and cherish the past. But it also showed her that she didn't have to live there. She didn't have to hold on to every memory so tightly, fearing that letting go meant losing her connection to the person she had once been. Her time in Seattle had become a beautiful balance. One foot in the past, one in the present. She had learned to find strength not in forgetting her life with Walter, but in accepting it as part of who she was. In doing so, she found herself more able to embrace the new life she was building, even if it looked different than she had imagined. One morning, as Bernice sat at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee, she noticed something she hadn't really paid attention to before: the way the sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating the small plants Tanya had placed along the windowsill. There was a sense of comfort in that small, everyday detail, and Bernice realized it was the kind of thing she had taken for granted for years. Her gaze wandered to the apartment around her, and she took in the quiet beauty of her new surroundings. The space wasn't hers in the way her old home had been, but it had started to feel like her own. She had made it her own. She had let it settle into her life, accepting its imperfections, just as she had learned to accept her own. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was hers. Tanya entered the kitchen, her face tired from a long week of work, but she smiled as she poured herself a cup of coffee. "Morning, Mom," she said, settling down beside Bernice. "Morning, sweetheart," Bernice replied, her voice full of warmth. "How's everything going?" Tanya shrugged, taking a sip from her mug. "Busy, but it's nothing new. It's just been a lot to juggle." Bernice nodded, understanding all too well the pressure of trying to balance so many things. She'd been in that place before, long ago, when her life had been filled with work and responsibilities, when she had been so focused on the next thing that she'd sometimes forgotten to pause and take a breath. "You've been working hard," Bernice said softly. "I think you deserve a break." Tanya looked up at her mother, her eyes softening. "I don't know how you do it, Mom. I mean, I can't imagine being where you are right now, starting over, figuring everything out. It's hard enough for me, and I have everything I need." Bernice smiled gently. She had spent so many years focused on being strong for others that she hadn't allowed herself to fully appreciate her own strength. She had come to Seattle thinking she was lost, but now she realized she had been rediscovering parts of herself all along, parts she hadn't known she had been missing. Bernice began, her voice steady, "when I first got here, I thought I was starting over. I thought I was trying to find my way back to who I used to be. But what I've realized is that I'm not looking for the past anymore. I'm learning to embrace what's right in front of me." Tanya's gaze softened, and she reached across the table, taking her mother's hand. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she said quietly. "I know it hasn't been easy, but you've done so much to get here, and I've seen you change." Bernice squeezed her daughter's hand in return. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'm proud of you too. You're doing the best you can, and that's all anyone can ask for." There was a moment of silence between them, but it wasn't awkward. It was a comfortable silence, one filled with mutual respect and understanding. Bernice knew in that instant that she didn't need to keep searching for a way back to who she had been. The person she was now, the person she was becoming, was enough. Later that afternoon, Bernice found herself back in her art class, standing before a blank canvas, the weight of her thoughts swirling around her. She had painted a lot in the past few months, mostly abstract, simple works, but today something felt different. The brush in her hand felt more like an extension of herself than it ever had before. She dipped the brush into the paint, her movements steady, deliberate. The strokes she made were fluid, easy, like the act of painting was as natural as breathing. She didn't worry about whether the painting would be good or right. She didn't need validation anymore. She just needed to create. As the canvas began to take shape, she realized that what she was painting wasn't a scene or a portrait. It was an expression of herself. It was the culmination of everything she had experienced, every lesson she had learned, and all the pieces she had put together over the past few months. And in that moment, Bernice knew that she had found something within herself that she hadn't known was missing. A piece that came not from perfection, but from the acceptance of imperfection. That evening, as Bernice stood in front of her finished painting, she felt a quiet satisfaction. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was hers, and that was enough. Tanya came home later, looking a little more relaxed than usual. As she walked into the living room, she stopped and looked at the painting on the wall. "Wow, Mom," Tanya said, her voice full of admiration. "That's beautiful." Bernice smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "It's not perfect, but it's what I needed to make." Tanya walked over and stood beside her, looking at the painting. "It's perfect to me," she said softly. For a moment, they both stood there, appreciating the quiet beauty of the room. It wasn't just the painting that was beautiful. It was the understanding between them, the unspoken acknowledgement that they had both grown, both changed. And in that silence, Bernice realized that she wasn't starting over anymore. She had started again. Yes, but in doing so, she had created something new. Something that was just as much hers as it was her daughter's. And for the first time in a long time, Bernice felt truly at peace with that. The days continued to stretch into weeks, each one filled with small, incremental moments of change. Bernice had begun to settle into the rhythm of life in Seattle. But it wasn't the familiarity she had been looking for. It was something more. It was the feeling of finally starting to see the world through a different lens. A lens she had slowly but surely started to clear of the fog that had clouded her vision for so long. She had stopped comparing everything to her life before, stopped searching for ways to fill the emptiness that had once seemed so overwhelming. It wasn't about replacing what was lost. It was about accepting it as part of her story, part of who she was. And in doing so, she had found something unexpected. Freedom. That freedom had begun to spill over into other parts of her life. In the quiet hours of the morning, when Tanya was at work and the apartment was still, Bernice would walk through the city, letting her feet guide her without any specific destination. Sometimes she found herself at the park, sitting on a bench, watching the world go by. Other times she would end up at a small bookstore, wandering through the aisles, letting the weight of the words on the shelves settle into her thoughts. She wasn't rushing anymore. She wasn't trying to make sense of everything. She was simply living in the moment, letting life unfold without trying to control it. One afternoon, Bernice found herself back at the community center where she had taken her art class. She had a bit of time before her next class, and she decided to sit in the courtyard where flowers and trees surrounded a small pond. The air was warm, and the sound of children playing in the distance created a soft, comforting backdrop. It was there, sitting on the bench by the pond, that she saw someone she hadn't expected to see. Jack. He was sitting alone as he often did, his dog Max by his side. When he saw her, he smiled, that easy, familiar smile that had become a small comfort in her life. "Well, look who it is," he said, his voice warm and inviting. "You're becoming a regular in this park." Bernice laughed, walking over to join him on the bench. "I guess I am. I seem to find my way here more often than I expected." Jack patted the space next to him. "It's a good spot to think. Sometimes that's all we need, right? A place where we can just let the world spin while we're not spinning with it." Bernice smiled, settling in next to him. "Exactly. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately. About everything." Jack gave her a sidelong glance. "Everything, huh? That sounds like a lot." Bernice chuckled. "It's a lot, but it's also freeing. I'm not trying to figure everything out anymore. I've learned that sometimes the most important thing is letting go of the need to control it all." Jack nodded thoughtfully. "That's a hard lesson to learn, but it's the one that sticks the most." "I spent so long trying to keep everything in place," Bernice continued, "trying to hold on to things that weren't meant to stay. But now I see that what I thought was loss wasn't really loss at all. It was just change. And sometimes change brings something better, even if we don't realize it at the time." Jack's expression softened and he looked out over the pond. "I think you figured it out. The key isn't in finding the right answers. It's in knowing that we don't need them. At least not all of them." For a long time, Bernice had felt like she was waiting for something, waiting for the moment when everything would make sense again, when the pieces of her life would finally fall into place. But now as she sat there next to Jack, watching Max chase after a fallen leaf, she realized that maybe the waiting was over. Maybe the moment was here, right now. Later that evening, Bernice returned to Tanya's apartment, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. The conversation with Jack had opened something up inside her, a realization that she had been holding on to old versions of herself that no longer fit. It wasn't just about moving on. It was about embracing the new chapters, the unexpected changes, and the unfamiliar paths that lay ahead. Tanya was home when Bernice arrived. She was sitting at the kitchen table, a stack of papers in front of her. But when she saw Bernice walk in, her face brightened. "Hey, Mom," Tanya said with a smile. "How was your day?" "It was good," Bernice replied, her voice warm. "I met someone in the park, actually. Jack. He's someone I've talked to a few times, and today we had a conversation that made me realize something." Tanya looked at her curiously, leaning forward. "What do you mean?" "I realize that I've been holding on to the idea that I need to be someone I used to be. But I don't. I'm still figuring out who I am, and that's okay. I've learned that it's okay to let go of what I thought I needed and embrace who I'm becoming." Tanya's eyes softened, and she smiled. "I'm really proud of you, Mom. I can see the change in you. You're starting to live for yourself again, and I think that's exactly what you needed." Bernice sat down at the table with Tanya, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for her daughter's words. She had come to Seattle looking for a fresh start, but what she had found was so much more than she had ever expected. She had found peace in letting go, in allowing herself the space to become who she was meant to be. And as they sat together, talking about the small, everyday things that made up their lives, Bernice realized that the journey was just beginning. The beauty of it wasn't in the destination, it was in the steps they were taking along the way. The days in Seattle felt like they were blending together into a perfect rhythm. The hustle and bustle of city life was still ever present, but it didn't overwhelm Bernice anymore. There was a quiet strength in the way she moved through her days now. The uncertainty that once clung to her like a heavy fog had begun to lift, and she was starting to see things clearly, clearer than she had in years. It wasn't about fixing everything, about returning to the woman she had been before Walter's death. No, it was more about embracing the woman she was now. She wasn't who she had been, and that was okay. She was more than the sum of her losses. And for the first time in a long time, Bernice felt like she was finally at peace with that truth. One Saturday morning, Tanya suggested they take a day trip outside of Seattle. The weather was perfect, and the idea of getting out of the city for a while felt like the right thing to do. "We haven't done something, just the two of us, in a while," Tanya said, her eyes bright with excitement. "Let's go to the mountains. We can hike, get some fresh air, and just take a break." Bernice smiled at the suggestion. It had been a while since they had spent time together in nature, just the two of them, without any distractions. It felt like the perfect way to celebrate the new understanding they had reached, the new connection they were building. The drive to the mountains was peaceful. As they climbed higher, the city faded away, replaced by the vast, open beauty of the landscape. The towering trees, the sparkling lakes, and the distant peaks filled Bernice with a sense of awe. It was the kind of beauty that made her feel small, but in the best way possible. There was something humbling about it, something that reminded her how vast the world was and how much room there was for new beginnings. When they arrived at the trailhead, they laced up their hiking boots and set out, the path winding through dense forest, the air crisp with the scent of pine. Tanya and Bernice fell into an easy conversation, the kind that came naturally when there was no need for pretense, no expectations, just the shared experience of being together. As they hiked, the distance between them, both physical and emotional, seemed to shrink. There was no tension now, no awkwardness, just the quiet companionship of two people who had learned to understand each other in new ways. After a couple of hours, they reached a small clearing at the top of a ridge, where the view was breathtaking. The mountains stretched out before them, the valleys below dotted with small lakes that glittered in the sunlight. The world felt so vast from up here, and yet, in that moment, it felt like everything was perfectly in place. Bernice sat down on a large rock, looking out at the view. The silence between them was comfortable, not filled with tension or unspoken words. It was just the quiet hum of nature and the steady beat of their hearts. "Mom," Tanya said after a while, breaking the silence, "I'm really glad you're here with me. I know I've been so focused on my work, but I don't think I've told you how much I appreciate having you around. Bernice smiled, her heart swelling with affection for her daughter. I know you've been busy, and I don't want to be in the way. Tanya shook her head, her eyes soft. No, you're not in the way. You never have been. It's just, I've realized how much I've been taking for granted. Having you here is more important than anything. I've learned that. Bernice reached out and squeezed Tanya's hand, the gesture simple but filled with meaning. I've learned that too. It's not about trying to fit into the past. It's about being present for each other right now. Tanya smiled, nodding. Exactly. They sat there for a long while, just taking in the view, enjoying the silence, and appreciating each other's company. For the first time in a long time, Bernice felt a deep sense of gratitude, grateful for the journey she had taken, for the changes she had embraced, and for the future she was still building. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, they made their way back down the trail, the evening air cool and refreshing. They didn't talk much on the way back, but the peaceful silence was comfortable. When they reached the car, Tanya turned to her mother with a soft smile. You know, I think this is the start of something good, Tanya said, her voice filled with quiet certainty. Bernice smiled back at her. I think you're right. That evening, back in the apartment, they settled in for another movie night. The room was filled with the comforting light of the television, the soft sounds of the film playing in the background. But this time, it felt different. It wasn't just another evening spent in the same routine. It was a reminder that things had changed, not just between them, but within each of them. Bernice realized that the past year had been full of unexpected lessons. She had come to Seattle expecting to find a way to rebuild a life that was gone, but instead, she had built something new, a life that was still unfolding, still becoming. As she sat next to Tanya, watching the flickering light from the screen dance across the room, Bernice felt a quiet sense of peace. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she was content. She was exactly where she needed to be, and that was enough. The months that followed were marked by small victories and quiet moments of clarity. Bernice had found her footing in Seattle, and more importantly, she had found a sense of inner peace that had eluded her for so long. Her mornings were filled with routine, morning walks, coffee, painting, but it was the afternoons that often surprised her, as if life was gently nudging her forward, inviting her to take more chances and embrace whatever came next. Tanya had continued to thrive in her career, but their relationship had reached a new level of understanding. There were still challenges, still moments of hesitation, but the unspoken distance between them had disappeared, replaced with a quiet but undeniable bond. They had become partners in this journey, each supporting the other in the ways that mattered most. And yet, as Bernice sat on the couch one quiet evening, a thought began to stir within her, a thought she hadn't quite acknowledged before. It was time to visit home. For the first time in years, the idea of returning didn't feel like a step backward. It didn't feel like reclaiming what had been lost. Instead, it felt like a new beginning, a way to revisit the past, not as something she was trying to hold on to, but as something that had shaped who she was today. The thought filled Bernice with a quiet excitement. She hadn't seen her old friends in months, and she had missed them. Miriam had already invited her to come back, and now it seemed like the right time to make that visit, to show them the new Bernice, the one who had learned how to live with the mess of life instead of fighting against it. As she picked up the phone to book the flight, Tanya walked into the room, a look of curiosity on her face. "Who are you calling?" Tanya asked, sitting down beside her. "I think I'm ready to go home," Bernice said softly. "To visit." Tanya's eyes softened and she reached over to take her mother's hand. "I think that's a great idea, Mom. You've been talking about it for a while now. I can see how much it means to you." Bernice smiled, squeezing Tanya's hand. "It does. It means a lot. I think, I think I need to go back, not to reclaim anything, but to honor it, to see it for what it is. And then I'll come back here. This new home, the one I'm still building." Tanya nodded, her voice steady. "I understand. I think it's going to be really good for you." A few weeks later, Bernice found herself standing in the familiar airport of her hometown. She had flown in the night before and had spent the morning walking through the small town that had once been her world. The streets were just as she remembered, quiet, peaceful, and full of memories. There were familiar sights, the old bookstore, the park where she and Walter had spent lazy summer afternoons, but there was also a newness to it, a sense of time passing that made her feel like she was visiting a version of her life that was no longer fully hers. When she arrived at Miriam's house, the warmth of her old friend's embrace was like a balm to Bernice's soul. Miriam hadn't changed much. She still had the same laugh, the same kind eyes that made Bernice feel at home, no matter how much time had passed. "You look good, Bernice," Miriam said, stepping back to take in her old friend. "You really do. You seem different, in a good way." Bernice smiled softly. "I feel different, Miriam. I'm not the same person I was when I left. I've learned so much over the past few months. It's been a journey, one that I didn't expect to take, but I'm so glad I did." Miriam's face softened, and she gestured for Bernice to sit down. "I'm so glad you came back. I think you needed this, and I'm so happy for you. I can see the peace in you that wasn't there before." They spent the afternoon reminiscing, catching up on old stories, laughing about their children and the times they had shared. Bernice felt a deep sense of gratitude for these moments, for the reminder of who she had been before everything had changed. But there was no longing for the past, only a recognition of how it had shaped her. As evening fell, they shared a quiet dinner, and for the first time in years, Bernice didn't feel like she was waiting for something. She wasn't waiting for the past to come back or for things to be different. She was here now in this moment, and that was enough. The next morning, Bernice stood in front of the house, looking out at the familiar landscape. Miriam had gone to run some errands, and Bernice had a moment alone to think. She had made her peace with this place, with this version of her life. It was a chapter she would always carry with her, but it wasn't a chapter she needed to relive anymore. When Miriam returned, they took a walk down the main street together, enjoying the quiet of the town. As they passed by a small cafe, Miriam turned to Bernice. "You've changed, Bernice. I can see it. You finally let go of all the things that were holding you back." Bernice stopped walking for a moment, taking in her friend's words. "I've learned that letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It just means making space for what's next." Miriam smiled and nodded. "You've got it. And I think that's what you needed all along." Later that afternoon, Bernice sat in the small park near Miriam's house, reflecting on the journey she had taken. The past was still there, a part of her, but it no longer defined her. She had built something new in Seattle, a life that was hers, filled with moments of peace, growth, and acceptance. When she boarded the plane back to Seattle, Bernice felt a quiet sense of closure. She had honored her past, but now it was time to embrace her future with open arms, ready to keep painting her life with the colors she had chosen. Back in Seattle, as Tanya greeted her at the door, Bernice smiled, feeling at home in a way she hadn't expected. "You okay, Mom?" Tanya asked, noticing the soft glow in her mother's eyes. Bernice nodded, her heart full. "I'm more than okay. I'm home." And with that, Bernice realized that home wasn't a place. It was a feeling. It was the peace she had found within herself, the love she shared with her daughter, and the life she was still creating. In the end, Bernice's story is a journey of acceptance, change, and the strength that comes from rediscovering oneself. Through the ups and downs of life, she learned that change isn't something to fear, but an opportunity to grow and find peace within herself. We can't change the past, but we can create our future by living fully and embracing the imperfections. Have you ever felt scared when facing change in your life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want to continue exploring inspiring tales, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any future stories. Thank you for watching.